Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. Hope everybody's doing well today. Good morning, Connie. Good morning, Charles. Glad to see you guys on here today. Roger and Anita. Oh, just you right now. Okay. Well, good morning, Anita. Hope you guys are doing well. All right, so we are ready for Revelation chapter 17 in our study today. Go ahead and pull that up. This chapter here is, good morning, Diana. I guess I kind of consider it one of the climax chapters of the book because of the content of this particular chapter. Again, the whole book is pointing towards the ultimate battle between good and evil, between the Lamb and the dragon. And Revelation 17 really clearly defines the time frame, the audience of this book, because there are some people who believe that the book of Revelation was written in regard to the destruction of Jerusalem. Chapter 17 completely does away with that idea for a variety of reasons. So we're going to cover that today in our next 20 minutes or so. Good morning, Margaret, and good morning, Lyle. Glad to have everybody on here today. All right, so we're going to break this chapter down, as you see in our outline here, into two sections, verses 1 through 6, and then verses 7 to 18. Good morning, Paces. The first 6 verses here of Revelation chapter 17 talk to us about the Lamb of overcoming Babylon. Then one of the 7 angels, of course we just had the 7 angels pouring out the 7 bowls of God's wrath. So one of those angels, we're not told which one, doesn't matter, who had the 7 bowls, came and talked with me, saying, "Come, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot." The great harlot. Some versions use the word whore, who sits on many waters. Now, pay attention to that, because we're going to come back and later in the chapter and figure out who this is. The great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made to drink with the wine of her fornication. Again, this cannot be a reference to Jerusalem, as a lot of people believe. And a lot of people who hold to the early date of Revelation, they say it was written before AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed. Again, this chapter is going to completely do away with that, with the description of this woman. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. And again, scarlet or red in the book of Revelation often represents warfare, bloodshed, things like that. And not just the book of Revelation, but other prophetic books. Scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And we've read about other beasts have 7 heads and 10 horns earlier in the book. And one of the things that we need to understand is that's symbolic of political power, governmental power. They were arrayed in purple and scarlet, colors of wealth and royalty, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. You'll notice that all of these things are external descriptions, with the clothing and the adornment and things like this. Having in her hand a golden cup full of the abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk, and this is key here, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So again, all of these details are significant, and they help us understand what's going on here. Who in the first century was so viciously and ferociously persecuting the church? Well, it wasn't the city of Jerusalem. It was the Roman Empire, and it was the various emperors throughout that first century, and even beyond the first century to some extent. Good morning, Debbie. Good to see you on here today, too. So this woman is as I have in your outline here, she is the antithesis of the woman who is clothed with the sun back in Revelation chapter 12. The complete opposite of this. Verses 5 through 6, again, identify this woman as Babylon the Great. We're dealing with Rome here. That's who we're dealing with. Now you'll notice, as we've studied throughout this book, that Satan has his allies, and we talked about that from Revelation 13. Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10, you have government force or government coercion. And then verses 11 through 18 of that chapter, you have false religion and deception. Those are Satan's allies. But here, in Revelation chapter 17, another one is another ally, if you will, of Satan is revealed, and that is this idea of lust, fornication. And those words are not used in the physical act, in the physical instance of fornication, but the concept of, just like in the Old Testament prophets, for example, the book of Hosea. Hosea, of course, married Gomer and was instructed by God to take a woman from the background of prostitution. And that relationship between Hosea and Gomer illustrated the relationship between God and Israel, and how Israel was, throughout the relationship, unfaithful to God, constantly committing fornication with foreign allies. And so that's how this word is used here in Revelation chapter 17, when it's talking about these people, or this woman rather, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and fornication. That's what we're dealing with here. Compromise with the world and world powers. Again, in the first century context, in the historical setting, who would that better describe in the world than Rome, the dominant world empire at that time? So, and I put in your outline here, she is described as sitting on many waters. So let's go ahead and figure out what that means. And this very chapter reveals that. You go down to verse 15, Revelation 17:15. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. There's your definition of this woman who is persecuting the church. It's Rome. Jerusalem was not a world power in the first century. It just wasn't, and there's nothing that can be cited to prove that it was. Now, Rome was. Rome was a dominant world empire. Rome was in the process of persecuting the church. That's this harlot that we see sitting on this beast. And all the nations of the earth committing fornication with her. That is, being involved with the political powers of the day. And of course, then you have verse 6 here talking about they're drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. All right, so verses 1 through 6, John's vision of a woman. We know who this woman is, who the harlot is. And then beginning in verse 7 down through verse 18, again, the text identifies even further for us what we're dealing with here. Notice verses 7 and 8. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. All right, so some interesting language there. There's no question about it. What are we talking about here? Well, number one, we're talking about people who were under the influence of the beast, of the woman, okay, of Rome, of the political power of the day, because their names are not written in the book of life, verse 8. So there's a clear distinction. Again, we've noted this multiple times throughout the book of Revelation, of those who are in the book of life and those who are not in the book of life, of those who are in heaven and those who are not in heaven, those who are sealed with the mark of the beast and those who are sealed with the name of God. This is just another part of that delineation between God and his allies and Satan and his allies. And so this woman and this beast, they are under control of the dragon. You'll recall the dragon from Revelation chapter 12 and verses 9 through 11. Under the control of Satan, under his influence, and they are the ones who have been persecuting God's people. Again, as you keep reading here, beginning in verse 9, he goes further, this angel goes further into the description of this thing that he sees, this beast. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. Now notice how that's worded there. I find this interesting. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Okay, so if the woman represents Rome and Rome's persecution against the church, it's interesting to note that even in the first century, Rome was called the City of Seven Hills. The City of Seven Hills. I mean, Google it. You'll find it. But they are also seven kings. Which kings are they? I think this is one of those passages where people get off in the weeds, and I've heard these discussions before. Well, which Roman emperors is this referring to? Do you start counting from Julius Caesar? Do you start counting from Augustus Caesar? Which part of the Roman Empire do you start counting from to get to the 7th king and the 10th king and the 5th? To me, those are academic pursuits. Those are discussions that, yeah, they may have their place. But it often causes people to lose sight of the bigger picture here. This is an image of Rome, the city that sits on 7 hills. The kings, whoever they may be, the emperors, however you want to say it, and the influence that they have. So again, I would add a word of warning here, as I've done multiple times throughout this series. Don't miss the forest for the trees. People try to hone in on every little detail. And there's the fact of the matter is, as I've said also throughout this series of videos, I've got 20 or 25 commentaries on the book of Revelation, and the amount of division that exists among people who are trying to figure out, okay, who are the 5, verse 10, and who are the ones who have fallen, who's the one that is and not yet come. The fact that there is so much division over that shows me that I'm not really concerned with nailing down every precise small detail in the book of Revelation. You get off in the weeds, and I don't see the benefit of it personally. We know the overall picture here. So anyway, there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other one has not yet come. And when he comes, he will continue for a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7th, and is going to perdition. And I think that's the point there at the end of verse 11. They're all going to perdition. And that word perdition in the Greek simply means destruction. Whoever's in charge here, whatever kings he's talking about, the 5th, the 8th, the 7th, the ultimate end is, and that's the point of Revelation, is they're all going to be destroyed. They're all going into perdition. Don't miss that point. So I put just a couple of things in your outline here about that. The division on the meaning of the 7 kings is wide. Well, that's an understatement. Some believe it's a reference to the kingdoms, which have historically been aligned against God's people. Others believe it is a reference to 7 specific rulers of the Roman Empire. Others believe it is speaking symbolically of any and all governments that stand against God's people. Whatever they mean. All right, whatever position a person were to take, here's the point. They're all going to perdition. They're all going to be destroyed ultimately by God. All right, I think that's the bigger picture here that we should be picking up on. Verse 12, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. All right, it's for 1 hour. So this, in other words, to the Christian, he's saying they are in power. They're going to have power for, as he says, 1 hour for a limited amount of time. But you notice this power is in alignment with the beast, verse 12. And again, we know who the beast is. Verse 13, these are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. They're of one mind. They have one goal. And ultimately, again, all of these kings and horns and mountains, this woman here, the beast, they're all under the control of the dragon. They're of one mind. That's what he's saying here in verse 13. And they're going to make war with the Lamb. This is your key verse of the entire book of Revelation, right here. They are going to make war with the Lamb. That's the imagery that we've been seeing. And the Lamb will overcome them. There's your key word in the book of Revelation, overcome. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Those who are with him, the Christians, those who are on God's side. They're called and faithful and chosen, and ultimately, even though the persecution is great, even though the beast has power and the dragon seems to be overwhelming them, the Lamb will be victorious. That is the overarching theme of the book of Revelation, And chapter 17 and verse 14 is, to me, it's the central verse of the entire book. That's the one you need to remember when you study Revelation. Then he said to me, now we've already looked at this verse, so the angel is defining for John. See, here's the thing. John is seeing this vision, and the angel is explaining to him. So think about that. The angel has to explain to John what these things mean. And luckily it's recorded for us. He said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. All right, the influence around the world. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. One of the things that historians tell us is that Rome was destroyed ultimately, yes, from some outside forces, but ultimately from the division that existed within the kingdom. And I think this verse here speaks to that, because the horns were on the beast, the woman's on the beast. But the angel tells John in time they're going to hate the harlot. They're going to make her desolate, naked, and eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill His purpose. And there you go. Who's in control here? It's kind of like in the book of Daniel, when the Jewish people are under Babylonian captivity, and then they're under Persian captivity, yet throughout that book we're told the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. Listen, it looks bad now, and it is bad. But the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men and gives them to whomsoever He will. That's Daniel 4:17, that's Daniel 4:25, and then several other verses in the book of Daniel. That's what we see here in Revelation 17:17. God has put it into their hearts to fulfill His purpose, to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman who you saw is that great city who reigns over the kings of the earth. Again, there is no possible way that can apply to the city of Jerusalem. It's not possible. It's just not. There was one city, if you will, one empire in the first century that ruled over the kings of the earth, and that was the Roman Empire, period. And to me, and this is just me thinking out loud here, but this takes me back to Deuteronomy, Daniel chapter 2, when Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar saw that great image, which represented 4 different kingdoms. You remember that he told Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold, and after you another kingdom will arise, and after that kingdom a third, and after that kingdom a fourth. And that 4th kingdom is a reference to the Roman Empire. And it was destroyed, you remember, in Daniel 2, by a stone that was cut out of a mountain without hands. That's a reference to the kingdom of God. And as you read Daniel 2, verses 38 through 45, that becomes very clear. Well, here, the woman is defined. The fact that it's going to basically, verse 16, eat itself alive, this kingdom. This is God's purpose, verse 17, and we know who the woman is, verse 18. It's the one who rules over all the kings of the earth. It's the dominant world empire of the day, which is Rome. So to me, as I said in the beginning, Revelation chapter 17 is kind of a climactic chapter, because this in a sense, in finality, shows that yes, there has been a struggle. There's the beast and the woman and the power that it has, the 7 heads and the 10 horns, the political power and influence, but ultimately it's all going to be taken away. In other words, God's cause is ultimately going to be victorious. Overcome is used in this chapter. And again, remember Revelation. I keep saying Daniel. Remember Revelation chapters 2 and 3, the letters to the 7 churches of Asia. Every one of those churches was told, he who overcomes will, and then you fill in the blank with what the promise was. Overcome, I think I wrote it down here. The word overcome is used, according to my notes here, 13 times in the book of Revelation. So chapter 17 is the climax of the imagery, if you will. The rest of the book, chapter 18 through the end, just shows the finality of Babylon, Rome, falling, and the kingdom of God being dominant, or being overwhelming, if you will. Exactly like Nebuchadnezzar's vision as recorded in Daniel chapter 2. That's your big picture here. All right. that's what I've got for today. Revelation chapter 17. I don't see any questions or comments here. Glad to have everybody on. As always, if you have anything further after the video is over, you will be able to access it on our Facebook page. If you have somebody who doesn't do Facebook who'd like this content, send them over to our YouTube channel. It's Mammoth Spring Church of Christ on YouTube, and all of our content is there. Playlists, individual lessons, and things like that. So appreciate y'all being on here today on Facebook Live. Have a good day, and Lord willing, I will see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. and we will study from Revelation chapter 18. Have a good day.